Hello and welcome to Narrative Forge Productions. In this video, I wanted to talk about figurative language, and figurative language is such a broad topic. I, of course, can't cover it in today's episode. I'm probably going to talk about it many times over, as well as a lot of other... I just fell over. Please pardon that. I'm probably going to talk about it many times over in this series. But yeah, figurative language. So... You've probably heard me talk about this before, but the things you read and the things you listen to will, I repeat, will, not might, not maybe, will affect your writing profoundly. If you read a lot of Harry Potter, you are going to write stories like J.K. Rowling. Of course, you don't want to plagiarize, but you're going to end up writing in that style. If you read a lot of, say, The Hunger Games, you are going to end up wanting to write your story in first person about somebody in a situation like The Hunger Games, etc. It will inspire you. You'll end up writing like the author. And, of course, you don't want to plagiarize, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that what you read affects the way you write. So let's say, for example, I like to use this example because it really kind of pushes the point. Let's say you tell somebody who's never read a book before in their life, never heard a story in their life, to write you a story. They will have no idea what you're talking about, call you a madman, and, throw your pen and paper in your face because they have no idea what you're talking about. They'll probably get frustrated, right? And obviously that's an extreme example. Most people have heard stories before. But the point I'm trying to make is that the more you read, the more you'll be adding to your toolbox of writing techniques. Now let's say you gave that person who's never read a story before, you gave them a book to read and they read it. They now know what a story is. They're out of their confusion. They have read the book, and then you tell them write a book. Then they're like, okay, I know what you're talking about now. I can do that. How much like that book is the book they read? Is their book going to be? I imagine it's going to be very similar because that's the only experience they've ever had with writing or with, a story, right? So obviously they don't know very many other ways in which a story could take place. So it's going to be very, very similar. Now that's an extreme example, but I'll explain how that's relevant to you. If you only read certain types of stories, let's say you read mystery stories, right? And all by the same author or all by the same two authors, whatever. Your stories are going to be very, very much like that author's stories. And, of course, you don't want to plagiarize, of course. An inspiration from an author is great. But to see the example I gave where you give that one person who's never heard a story before one story, then they have to write their own. Every time you read a book in a different style or different genre or by a different author, you're sort of watering down the effect one person has on you. So let's say that the person who's only ever heard one story before, let's say you show him 10 books. You've watered down the amount his story is going to be like the first book he's read 10 times. So his story is going to be 10 times more original because he has more things to draw from, because he has more experience with stories. And so he has more things to draw from. He's added more tools to the toolbox. He can now create more original stories. Now let's say you show him 100 stories. He now has 100 times, he's watered down the effect that one book had 100 times, and now he has 100 times more writing tools, writing techniques to draw from. His stories are now going to be 100 times more original. So if you always read Harry Potter, branch out and read something else, because, and I promise I'm going to talk about figurative language in a second, but if you always read, say, Harry Potter, branch out and read something else, something completely different, because you'll be adding tools to the toolbox, your writer's toolbox, and you'll be able to draw more from it, and your stories will be more original from it, because if you always read one kind of story, your stories are going to be probably always in that vein. But if you read lots of different kinds of stories, your writing is going to be more broadened out and you'll have more to draw from. And I want to give you an example of that. Recently, I've been reading the Iliad, and it was sort of the only thing I was reading because it's something that I really wanted to tackle and take on head first. And so I wasn't reading anything else. And just like 5 chapters in, only 5, somewhere around there, I went ahead and wrote something, and it was so much like the Iliad. It was written using similar metaphors, similar figurative language, similar everything. And of course, I'm not saying my writing is as good as Homer's. Of course it's not. What I'm saying is that it was in that style, very, very profoundly in that style. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. But once I kind of read more other things more so and didn't just read the Iliad, then it kind of evened out a little, and then I could put to use things I learned from reading the Iliad, but I was also able to put to use other styles of writing, other genres, other writers' kind of tools, etc. in my writing. So it wasn't just kind of Homeric writing anymore, it was more kind of my own original take on writing. Now, I really hope that makes sense to you guys. I couldn't find any other way to describe it, and if it doesn't make sense, please feel free to talk to me in the comments, because I'm more than happy to answer your questions and to go into a bit more detail. And if you want, you can request another video on this, just so I can push the point a little further if it doesn't quite make sense. But it's my hope that this makes sense to you. Now, on to figurative language, finally. So, I was kind of inspired to make this because I started listening to the audiobook of Paradise Lost, an incredible book. It's very hard to follow. It's like, the best way I could describe it is Homeric language, but with Shakespeare's grammar. That's what it sounds like. I know it's kind of hard to follow, but it's also incredibly beautifully written. And there's this one line that really struck me, and is the inspiration behind this video. And in chapter 1, pretty early on, after the devil falls from heaven, and he's been cast to hell, the line goes something along the lines of, and he throws his eyes around. Now, obviously, we know he's not holding his eyeball and, like, throwing it, right? Sorry for that graphic picture, but you get what I'm saying, right? Obviously, he's not holding it, right? When we hear Milton write about throwing his eyes around, we obviously know it means he's, like, kind of throwing his head about and looking wildly all over the place in a state of confusion or despair, probably. And so it's a very, very graphic, not graphic as in the sense of violent, like graphic as in the sense of very easy to picture in your head. Because Milton could have just said, glanced about him, and that works, but throwing his eyes around is such incredible figurative language, because it really, really helps you visualize what's happening. And it really, really is just a beautiful way to captivate your readers and let them know what's going on. And so I invite you now to come up with your own figurative language. It can be hard, but it's worth it. Create your own metaphors, your own similes, your own figurative language, and that will really strike your readers, because everybody hates cliches, right? Dead as a doorknob or whatever, right? Nobody likes hearing stuff like that. Cliches like that. But throwing your eyes around, that's like the one thing I remember the most from that chapter. And it's a 40-minute long chapter. It's an audiobook, keep in mind, that I'm listening to. 40-minute long. And that's the one part I remember the most. That one line. And so I invite you now to come up with your own figurative language like that, because it captivates your readers. And it's actually amazing, because Milton didn't have to write paragraphs and paragraphs of description for me to know what was happening. he only had to use one word, throwing his eyes around, for me to be able to picture what was happening in the story perfectly. And it was just like this eureka moment to me. I was like, I gotta use this in my writing. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys. Hopefully you learned something from this video. If you got any questions, feel free to ask me anything in the comments. I'll do my best to respond to all you guys, and please like and subscribe because it definitely helps out a ton. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.